Hey guys, and welcome back to Psychology Time. This session we are going to be talking about phobias and psychosomatic disorders. I included the two of them into one video because they kind of play the same field, and I'm going to explain what I mean by that. But instead of having two separate videos, I just combined them into one. So let's start with psychosomatic disorders. The word psychosomatic comes from two Greek words, psych, meaning mind, and soma, meaning body. So it's mind and body. An example of a psychosomatic condition is when somebody loses a limb, but they're still able to feel sensations from that phantom limb. So let's use a leg as an example. People have described these sensations as a pet brushing up against their leg when they don't have one anymore. Or an unbearable itch that they just can't scratch because there's nowhere to scratch. So these conditions can be treated. They're typically treated with medicine, but of course, the individual and the severity of the case, it changes what kind of medication you need and at what dosage. So it all depends on the person. The cause of psychosomatic disorders is most commonly trauma. So when people go off to war and they lose a limb, they sometimes won't realize they've lost a limb. They will still feel like they have that part of their body that they lost. Some of the symptoms that can be experienced are dizziness, nausea, pain, and just any sort of sensation whatsoever. But having pain does not mean that you have a psychosomatic disorder. If, let's say I lost my finger, but I could still feel it, that's a psychosomatic disorder. The reason this is a psychosomatic disorder is that the pain is not originating from the body physically. Typically when we hurt ourselves, like let's say I cut my hand. I wasn't being careful when washing dishes, I cut my hand. Well, my body sends signals to my brain to let me know that I've hurt myself by accident. And so then I feel pain. What happens with psychosomatic conditions is I wouldn't have a hand, but my brain would tell me that I'm feeling pain here, or I'm feeling an itch, but there's nothing there. That's a psychosomatic condition. I'm going to talk about another little fun fact about the mind here. This one I've always thought was really cool. Doctors would give patients sugar pills. And so sugar pills are not going to cure you. But they told the patients that they were taking a powerful medicine that would help them get better. And do you know what happened? The patients started to feel better. They started to recover and get better. It's because they believed the medicine was working. I'm not saying if you catch a cold that you can will away the cold. It's not going to work. It's not like that. But it's called the placebo effect. They believed that they were getting powerful medicine. So their brain reacted as if they were getting powerful medicine, and it began to treat itself. I just thought that was a little fun fact to throw in there for you guys. Let's move on to phobias. What is a phobia? A phobia is an extreme and usually irrational fear of something that is usually not harmless. Usually not harmless is not what I meant to say. It is usually harmless. That's what I meant to tell you guys. I'm sorry about that. So, they're usually categorized into two groups: social phobia and specific phobia. So a social phobia is an extreme anxiety and self-consciousness of everyday situations. And I do mean this extremely. To worry about what people think about your outfit when you leave your house, that's not a social phobia. But when it's taken to the extreme, like you cannot leave your house out of fear of how people will look at you, that's a social phobia. Specific phobias are of specific things in nature, as you could guess. So these things are relatively harmless. They typically pose no threat and no harm to the individual. But when stimulated in the mind, this image or the situation brings forth an extreme reaction. Some of these things that are relatively normal and typically very safe are elevators, the dark, water, long words. There is a phobia about long words. Funny enough, the name for it is a long word. It's terrible. They should have thought something better of that. Clowns, snakes, being touched by others, germs. And I don't mean germs, like if you walk into a biology lab, please be careful. I mean, you don't want to shake hands with someone out of fear of the germs that are on their hand. Even if it's someone close to you, even if it's a family member, you would not shake their hand or give them a hug out of fear of what germs they are carrying. That is an extreme phobia. So the word phobia is another Greek word. It's phobos, which is the Greek god of fright. I thought that was cool. Yeah. Specific phobias are, like I said, and like you can guess, specific. So it's not a general aspect that scares you, but something specific. I had a friend who you could not say the word spider around her. If you said that word, she would have a panic attack. You could not say it. There could be no pictures. If one in the room, she might just faint. You could never, ever bring it up. And I know someone else who's terrified of snakes. Terrified. But it's not a phobia because they're able to see pictures, and it's more so that they're creeped out by snakes, less than that that it's a phobia. A phobia usually has a more physical reaction than just fear. It's usually panic and anxiety. Some people will have panic attacks. They'll have asthma attacks. Just the body becomes hypervigilant and typically panic sets in. A fun little fact, a lot of people I read a book, I can't remember what it's called for the life of me, but it talks about people who died by their phobias. And one of the cases was a woman, and she was terrified of water. Terrified of it. She was terrified of drowning. She drowned. But it's not like she couldn't swim. She got into the water, or she wound up in water, and she panicked. And when you panic, you might drown. So that's why you can't panic. But yeah, she died by drowning, which is probably terrifying, and it's probably one of the worst ways to go, is dying by your phobia. Another guy was afraid of the dark, terrified of it. He had a heart attack when the lights went out. It was dark and he had a heart attack. Once again, terrible way to go. So, yeah, as I mentioned, symptoms, it's all physical reactions. Typically, you cannot bring up the topic of it because it conjures images in their mind, and it's almost like a traumatic experience for them. Like, for my friend to hear spiders, you might as well have held a gun to her head. She was terrified. She could not hear the word. She would start to shake. And she'd have to cover her ears because she couldn't hear anymore. And if there was any mention that a spider could be in the house, she could not be in the house. It's very disruptive for people's lives. But there are ways to treat it. There's medicines that you can take, but I personally believe that the better route to go is to overcome your fear through exposure therapy. This is one of the methods I've read about, and that I think is the best. Because I want to be a psychologist, I don't want to practice medicine. I want to practice methods of coping and ways to get over it. That's kind of what I want to do. So I would help someone through exposure therapy rather than giving them medication to solve their problem. So what exposure therapy is, it's giving somebody small doses of what makes them afraid until they're no longer afraid, until they're able to conquer it. Of course, they have to be willing to conquer it. They have to want this, because if they don't, they never will. So it starts with talking about it. You bring up the subject. Like, let's use flying as an example. So somebody's afraid of flying. Well, you talk about flying. What scares them about flying? Then you show them pictures of planes, of, people skydiving, whatever scares them about flying. Then you get them to read about it so they know all the facts. From there, you can start touching on virtual reality, which is a really cool thing that's been implemented now. So any virtual reality simulator that can simulate flying for them, they give that a shot. And of course, all of this process has to go at an individual person's rate. You cannot push someone through this process. So the person would go through a simulator and feel what it's like to be in a plane. From there, they would get on a plane. Of course, that's the hardest part. And of course, this process is going to have failures all along the way, and that's all a part of the process. But, the reason why I decided to do psychosomatic disorders and phobias in the same thing is that they're both conditions that involve mind to body reactions. Psychosomatic is physical feelings from things you don't have anymore, from limbs you do not have. And phobias, I'm trying to breathe. I lost my train of thought for a second. Phobias are the fear that's conjured in the mind that leads to physical reactions. So you see why I kind of saw them as the same and why I wanted to put them in the same video. We're talking about the mind to body reactions here. So I have a neat little chart here for you guys that I'm going to show you. Not sure if you can read this and or see it, but I'm going to show it to you anyways. It's Phobias by Hal Markowitz. That's as close as I'm getting to that name. That's it. That's all that's happening there. And it's phobia's most common type of anxiety disorder. So a little bar graph there, and I'll read it off to you guys because there's no way you'll be able to see it. So it's people affected in the millions. And it goes by each disorder. It's obsessive compulsive disorder, which is OCD. 2.2 million people are affected by it. Panic disorder, 6 million people. Generalized anxiety disorder, 6.8 million people. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is 7.7 million people. Social phobia, 15 million people. And specific phobias, 19.2 million people. So, the reason I brought that up is because it includes phobias. And it talks about social phobia compared to specific phobia. More people have specific phobia. And the title of the chart is Phobias, most common type of anxiety disorder. But I wanted to share that with you guys, showing you that I get information from books, not just the internet. But that is all for this session. I am happy. I see over in the corner it just hit about 16 minutes. So I didn't drag this on for a half an hour again. Alright. Have a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, or good night, weary travelers of the internet. I see weary travelers because it's kind of a joke because people just sit on the computer and just point and click. So it's weary travelers like you're on some great journey. Though some corners of the internet no one wants to explore. Alright. I'll see you guys in the next video, which I'll be posting tomorrow. See you then.